Hey everyone, Father Lane here. Welcome to another class in our course on the prophetic literature, and today we have come to the south side of Chicago, home of the exploding scoreboard. And it's appropriate that we do so because all of the books we're talking about today, Nahum, Zephaniah, and Habakkuk, deal with impending war. So let's get after it. What do these three books have in common? You'll recall from several classes ago when we made our prophetic pigeonholes, these three books are set in the late 7th, early 6th century. They describe the time period where Assyria is losing power, but Babylon is starting to gain power. All three of these books are set during this time period. So let us begin with the book of the prophet Nahum, which I must confess is something of a guilty pleasure of mine. It's my favorite of the minor prophets because Nahum just says what he means. He's not trying to make anything look pretty. He's just telling people he's happy about what's happening to the Assyrians. What am I talking about? If you look at our little timeline here, the Assyrian Empire achieved great power beginning under Tiglath-Pileser III, we've talked about him several times, and then Shalmaneser V, followed by Sargon II, followed by Sennacherib. The Assyrian Empire indeed achieved its apex under King Esarhaddon, the son of Sennacherib. But then there was a quick decline in the Assyrian Empire, and you can see I've got highlighted here, the empire collapsed over scarcely a couple of decades. And so in 614, the original capital of Assyria, Ashur, fell, and then the capital city of Nineveh, which you can see on this map, fell in 612 BC. This delighted the prophet Nahum, who gloats over 3 chapters in his book. He says, "A jealous and avenging God is the Lord. An avenger is the Lord, full of wrath. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries and rages against his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger, yet great in power. The Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. In storm, wind, and tempest he comes, and clouds are the dust at his feet." You can notice here in green and red the positive and negative attributes, we might think of them, of the Lord. The Lord is slow to anger. He is great in power, and he uses that power because he cannot stand to see injustice go unpunished. And that's what he's doing. He is punishing the arrogance of the Assyrians. Nahum goes on to say, "The Lord is good to those who wait for him, a refuge on the day of distress, taking care of those who look to him for protection when the flood rages. He makes an end of his opponents and pursues his enemies into darkness. Indeed he does, and the enemy in question is Assyria, and here's what he does. I now come against you, oracle of the Lord of hosts, and I will lift your skirt above your face." You see what he's doing here? Nineveh, like many cities in the ancient world, is personified as a woman, and now here the Lord shames this daughter Nineveh. "I will show your nakedness to the nations, to the kingdoms your shame, until everyone who sees you runs from you saying, 'Nineveh is destroyed, who can pity her? Where can I find any to console you?'" In summary, Nahum to Nineveh, good riddance. That brings us to the book of the prophet Zephaniah, which is far less fun to read. Zephaniah is not talking about some foreign city's destruction. No, he's talking about Jerusalem's destruction. Here's what he says, the very beginning of the book. "The word of the Lord which came to Zephaniah in the days of Josiah the son of Ammon, king of Judah. I will completely sweep away all things from the face of the land, oracle of the Lord." That doesn't sound so good. Notice that this is set in the days of King Josiah. So we're in the late 7th century, between 640 and 609 BC, likely in the beginning of Josiah's reign. At least that's what a number of scholars think. Zephaniah is seeing the danger, and he's telling the people, "This day of the Lord, and it will not be a pleasant day." Indeed, the day is a major theme later on in Zephaniah chapter 1. "Near is the great day of the Lord. A day of wrath is that day, a day of distress and anguish." Notice these are what we call Hebrew genitives, where the word after of is an adjective. A wrathful day, a distressing day, an anguish-filled day. "A day of ruin and desolation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of thick black clouds, a day of trumpet blasts and battle cries against fortified cities, against lofty battlements." You'll see here that day of wrath. A day of wrath is that day. That's the opening line of the traditional sequence for Masses for the Dead, the Dies Irae. Dies Irae, Dies Illa. Day of wrath is that day. This comes from Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 15. But it's not all bad news in Zephaniah. The first chapter really deals with destruction of Jerusalem. Then in chapter 2, it goes into destruction against the surrounding nations. But there is a prophecy of restoration in Zephaniah chapter 3. This is the most famous part of this book. It gets used especially in Advent. We have it on the third Sunday of Advent in one of the cycle years. We also have it in Masses of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Shout for joy, daughter Zion. Sing joyfully, Israel. Be glad and exult with all your heart, daughter Jerusalem. The Lord has removed the judgment against you. He has turned away your enemies. The King of Israel, the Lord, is in your midst. You have no further misfortune to fear. In the green on the screen, you'll notice that the Lord has removed the judgment. That is, he has commuted Israel's sentence. He is bringing restoration. Although the people don't deserve it, he's showing mercy and restoring them. And in the blue, the King of Israel, the Lord is in your midst. This is why the church appropriates this canticle in masses and celebrations of the Blessed Virgin Mary, because the King of Israel, the final fulfillment of the King of Israel, the Lord Jesus, is within Our Lady. So there's that Theotokos imagery here, the God-bearer imagery. That brings us now to a few words on Habakkuk, and that's the preferred pronunciation, at least in most English-speaking circles. You will hear sometimes Habakkuk, which is a more Hebrew-sounding pronunciation. Either is correct. Habakkuk is principally about theodicy. Lord, why are you letting these things happen? Asks Habakkuk. Habakkuk looking forward to the Babylonian exile. Here's his question. How long, O Lord, must I cry for help, and you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, and you do not intervene? Why do you let me see iniquity? Why do you simply gaze at evil? And now part of the answer. Now I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter and impulsive people. Chaldeans is a synonym for the Babylonians. Chaldea, even to this day, refers to modern-day Iraq. So this is looking toward the Babylonian exile, which will, of course, come in the early 6th century, beginning in 597, and then, of course, in 586, we'll have the destruction of the temple. Habakkuk is most famous for a verse in chapter 2 that St. Paul uses in his letter to the Romans, where Habakkuk is talking about what it means to be just, what it means to truly please the Lord. And he says, "See, the rash have no integrity, but the just one who is righteous, because of faith, shall live." This is a tricky verse to translate from the Hebrew, because the Hebrew just says, "and the just," or the righteous, could be either one, "in his faithfulness will live." That word for faith comes from the root emet, which means faithfulness, truthfulness. There's a relational quality to it. That is, one who is reliable. So Habakkuk is telling Judah, be faithful to the covenant, flee injustice, and live as you ought to in accord with the covenant. We'll continue our study of the minor prophets in our next class. Until then, read well and pray well.